Hey, folks, we will give it a few moments. If anybody has anything to talk about today, let's add it to the agenda. Otherwise, it could be a very short meeting.
Let's see if I can hear you now. Can you hear me? I don't know if I can hear you though.
Why can't you hear me?
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Because I have my PC hooked up to. I have the same surround sound split systems hooked up to a multi output system, and so I can have my gaming PC or my Mac hooked up. And I was playing games last night, and so I'm like, whenever I start my morning, I forgot to change it over. So you were saying something when you logged in, and I couldn't hear it.
Oh, well, if you have any items for the agenda, please add them. Otherwise, it could be a very short call because I don't have anything to talk about, but I'm glad to talk about things that the community are excited about.
I have a thing to talk about.
Why isn't it on the agenda?
Oh, because the meeting notes aren't in the chat.
They're in the same agenda we've been using for the last year.
Really? Did they finally remove that redirect link so that it points to?
I don't know.
A document. Oh no, okay, we're good.
You work there, man.
Ew. Doesn't mean I run everything.
See, I have a policy.
Brian
I generally don't come to meetings if there is no agenda or items on the agenda.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start enforcing that.
Brian Russell over there funds this thing. He doesn't know how the whole thing works either.
Just because you're paying for it doesn't mean you know how it works or care.
I know, exactly.
You just want it to work, damn it.
Yeah.
All right, folks.
It's not my money.
Well, it's kind of my money too, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say it's many organizations' money.
Yeah.
Back to the topic though, you said that you had some things to put on, Jonathan, or
I do.
Are they on there at this point?
I'm working on it.
Okay.
Having an agenda before the meeting helps people prepare and then decide if they want to come, if it's something interesting.
Yeah. I would assume that the rest of us aren't operating with ADHD and do things at the last minute in order to, make sure that our lives are on track.
Sometimes your lack of planning is not my problem.
No.
Boy Scouts taught me always be prepared.
Yeah.
And also how to cook a biscuit on top of a fire I made with straw and rubbing two sticks together.
Yeah,
it's not as useful.
I never got past whatever the first thing is for Boy Scouts, like tenderfoot.
Tenderfoot.
I think I partially got to second class and then didn't go very far. Yeah, something I was motivated to do. I enjoyed the camping. I enjoyed the socializing. I didn't need to move up in the ranks in that particular organization.
All right. So as folks join us, please add things to the agenda. Jonathan added an item underneath the CVE AutoFix subgroup. So if you scroll down a little bit to the sub-project.
Name end up with the CVE in the beginning of the damn name.
I don't know. It's only been on the agenda since the dawn of time.
We don't have anything to do with auto-fixing CVEs.
Would you like to talk about your topic, Jonathan?
Yes. After many weeks of chewing on it, the specification for OpenSSF compliant automated vulnerability fix campaign is in a state in which we are seeking additional feedback on the document, given the changes we've made, to determine if it is missing anything that people think we really need to have in there for the specification. And I presume that given that it's a specification, there's a lot of verbiage in this document that currently doesn't is not specification standard sort of like, so we should probably make it better in that aspect. But I will screen share real fast. Okay, so a couple of main areas this document covers. I should have sent this to the email list before this meeting. ADHD. Yeah. All right. So the goal of this document is to define what it means to be operating an OpenSSF compliant automated vulnerability fix campaign. And it describes a set of constraints under which you must operate in order to be considered unconditionally compliant. So the first requirement is to report all vulnerabilities upstream. In particular, the vulnerability must be reported upstream before you attempt to do a bulk pull request. Like, so for example, you must try to get, like, you can't just, like, you know, start doing bulk pull request generation without having worked with the upstream maintainer to try to fix it in the vulnerable library, right? Like, if you can fix it upstream, it's always best to fix it upstream than trying to fix all the downstream consumers. The cases that may not be sufficient is when vulnerability exists in code generated by created by a code generator. I have firsthand experience with this. There was a vulnerability in 15,000 open source Java projects across the industry, across GitHub, because some code generator was generating vulnerable code and people kept pumping it out and creating GitHub repositories from it. Or the vulnerabilities in a project that's vendored widely, as is often the case in C++ libraries or libraries prepackaged manager, for example, jQuery. Then there's a requirement to do coordinated non-automated private disclosure. This is mostly in cases where the vulnerability is not newer or is new or novel, right? So if you're dealing with a newer novel vulnerability, then you must at least report to some number of projects privately. If the vulnerability is not new or novel, for example, external entity processing due to improper use of the Java standard library, which is a very well understood vulnerability. We've talked, you know, there's a bunch of documents about it. Then coordinated non-automated private disclosure is not required. Then private disclosure. There's a discussion around what is private disclosure, what is PVR, what should be, you know, PMPVR, which is a programmatic means of private vulnerability reporting. GitHub just calls this private vulnerability reporting. GitLab has private pull requests, requirements of how to use this. And then additionally, you must use the open source project OSSF/disclose check tool to find the relevant security contacts and email them at the same time as you try to request disclosure via, you simultaneously ask them via issue to enable the feature and also send them an email with the vulnerability in the patch. And then there's this flow chart that describes how PMPVR, how this entire flow works. There's a line that's missing that I'm going to update the image. There we go. And then we have some example scenarios that were written up around, like, take this document, run through some scenarios that explain, like, what would happen. These are really useful use cases. They're contrived examples, but it helps explain sort of some of the flows. And then 4, automated fix patch. Avoid patching test code exclusively. So you should try to fix it. You should try to not create pull requests that only fix test code, basically. The patch target should be the default branch. External review requirement. Campaigns should be, the fixes should be reviewed by a third party. In the past, I've used GitHub Security Lab to review, like, patches and stuff like that. So, like, you know, make sure it compiles, stuff like that. offer a requirement to offer disclosure assistance during the process, and then some requirements around messaging, so like what must be included in the vulnerability disclosure, what should be included, what must not be included, in particular marketing should be excluded, and then sponsorship messages must be posted on, if you're going to do sponsorship sort of stuff, then that goes in and attached. You can link to a document that describes the campaign, and that is where sponsorship information goes. This is the part that's a little bit less fleshed out, this topic of opt-out. So there's a requirement that you do have an opt-out mechanism. The only one that we have for like a standard is the OpenSSF Security Insight spec, which is the thing that's being developed by Luigi. The problem is that this is the minimal spec, and some of the feedback that we got from people is that this specification is too verbose to be a valid opt-out. We should have something that's simpler than having to drop an entire file in your repository that like, and I'm going to fill out all this information in a valid way. The goal upside was we were trying to encourage the use of if you're going to opt out, we were hoping that you would at least follow a different standard the OpenSSF is offering. Downside, it is more verbose and more heavyweight. So there's a discussion around like what alternative opt-out mechanisms we want to support. There was a discussion about using a standardized flag in a security.md file, something in the gitignore or git attributes file, or using something like the GitHub robots.txt file, which I currently am using for my campaigns in the past. What the opt-out behavior is that you must create a private public fork, must create a public fork from the vulnerable repository, and create a dedicated branch and apply the patch, but you must not create a pull request against the opted out repository. You would publish a link to that publicly. A global security database ID can be assigned, and the maintainers must not be contacted by the campaign operators regarding the disclosure of the vulnerability. So if you've opted out, the vulnerability still gets published, it still gets made public, the maintainers just don't get made aware of it. Let's see, vulnerability fix origin. There's a discussion of like what style of GitHub account you should be using. Maintainer communication responsiveness. Like, you know, you can't just run one of these campaigns and like be done. You have to actually engage with the maintainers when they have feedback. The ability to redeploy and rebase changes. So your campaign must have the ability to, if the maintainer says, hey, this is broken, like, you know, you should be able to rebase those changes with an updated fix from your campaign. And then some standardized messaging around like, you know, GPG key signing and CCOM conventions, and then coordination with the host around contacting GitHub or whoever the host is before you do this work, before you use their APIs in this way. This is a high level of the specification. Yes, Art. It's in the.
I'm sorry.
Notes.
I didn't look there. I'll go look. Thank you anyway.
No, it's right there. It's right there. I got you. So yeah. So this is the document. We're looking for feedback on. Are there things we haven't thought about? Are there things we haven't thought about? Is there more that we need for this to become a proper specification? Yada, 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 stuff like that. So, Crow.
What's the deadline you'd like this feedback by?
Tomorrow.
Or is there an issue, or you just want it right in this doc?
I need this within the next 3 hours. Yeah, no.
I will not be able to contribute. I'm sorry.
No, I'm going away on vacation for the next 2 weeks. So sometime within the next 2 weeks would be lovely. Also, so I'm going to be running the, I'm going to run this week's AutoFix SIG. But I'm going to be in California from next Tuesday to the following set for 10 days from that next Tuesday. So the SIGs that I've been running are probably going to go on pause for both of those. And I will not be making the next one of these meetings, I think, because that's in 2 weeks, right? Yeah. So I will be seeing you all in 4 weeks.
But you would like the feedback within the next 2 weeks, correct?
That would be lovely. From my cursory overview of this document, are there any questions, concerns?
I wanted to bring up one thing. I think I have an unaddressed comment somewhere. I think about the second page in. Nope, go back up. Yep, right there.
Oh,
is it?
Yeah, success metrics. So there was I agree that the alpha omega should be tracking this information. I'm not certain if we want to include this in the specification for, because the idea for this specification is to define the set of requirements for anybody who's implementing this specification or implementing this. Do you want to see success metrics for everybody that does work like this, or do you just want to see it for alpha omega because we'll be, you're a stakeholder in alpha omega?
Yeah, I mean, I would say ideally, we kind of have visibility into everyone that's involved, but alpha omega would be the main starting point for me. And I note in the comment too, I'm not sure if it's really right for the specification either, but I think thinking about it, having it down somewhere such that we can kind of see, is this process working? Because I think everything that you've laid out just generally makes sense. I think for any process though that you put out there, there's kind of an unknown of how well it's actually doing the job it set out to do. So that's why I think it's important to really track, is this achieving those goals from the get-go? Yeah. And then if it's not, we can say, let's go back to the specification and tweak things and kind of treat it more like an experiment.
Yes, I agree. Yes. So I think that in the infrastructure that I'm building out, which is another repository, OpenSSF, no, not split check. Oh, there we go. So this is the this diagram here is a flow graph. That's going to take, that's a flow graph. There's this project, which is the Open Auto Phone Disclose project, which I've been working on to basically take this flow graph and turn it into something that we could actually operationalize in a code base. So this is a state machine for that flow graph. And ideally, this would be something that would have a database backend, stuff like that. So you could take, information about how long it takes to transition between these states and stuff like that, and use that for metrics as well as understanding, like, is the issue closed? What state is every single thing in? So this would be more the portal for that information to get captured. But yes, that it is something that we want to consider capturing. I just don't know if it's good in the specification or more just like, let's make that something that we put into the code base for this.
I mean, I think what you could do is maybe start a separate doc linked to it, so it's not really blocking the proposal to get the success metrics down. But I think if you said this specification is linked with these metrics, and we can always just pick arbitrary metrics, but I think we have to be a little bit more thoughtful, think about a statement of what we're trying to achieve, maybe some goals of how we know, basically make the goals explain how we know we're getting there, and then make the metrics back those goals up. And I think that will give us a really useful sense of, did we all give good feedback? Did we make the right decisions on this proposal? You know, I think there's a tendency to kind of just treat any sort of specification or a process as kind of we designed it once and we're done with it. I think a lot of times it might be better looked at as an MVP, where it's like everybody thought this was probably the best that we could do, but sometimes the real world kind of resets expectations once you start going through it. And I think if you have metrics to work against, you know, then when you make changes, you can also cite those and say, hey, you know, we're trying to close more issues, so we're modifying what we're doing here. We've changed the language of this email, or we've changed the time that we resend emails, things like that.
Yeah, wouldn't it just absolutely suck if we found out that actually opening public pull requests for to fix security vulnerabilities was actually faster and quicker and got more things fixed than doing it privately, sort of thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, but that's something that we want to know.
Right, exactly. Like, yeah.
How are our decisions and what we think is going to be good actually, is it actually good?
Yes. Yes, that makes a lot of sense. All right, so I can write up a success. I'll basically take your comment and expand upon it in a separate document. I don't know if so one of the things that I found is, especially when it comes to publishing specifications, is that if you link to another document in a specification and that specification doesn't end up getting with the model disclosure policy, like I had a link to this document, but this document was under active development. People like the lawyers and stuff like that don't love it when you're trying to productize a final document and you have another document that's a work in progress. So we will tie them together in some way, potentially conceptually in our own heads. We may not have a direct link between the two of them within the contents of the reading of the document.
I think this is where maybe the phrasing that goes along with the link of that document is key, to basically say, you know,
here are some things you might want to consider for success.
Yeah, and I think you can be very explicit and say,
actually, that's not bad.
This document doesn't need to be blocked on agreement on success.
Right.
Metrics.
That might actually be. Yeah. So that might be above the protocols. Right, that might be a section. Then if it's like, these are things that you may want to consider in terms of considering success, that could be either above or below protocols, right? Like, you know, not something that you must implement, but these are some things you may want to consider as success metrics.
Yeah, I mean, my criteria is if we can just find it back. That link being on the doc somewhere is the most key thing.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. All right, I will poke at finding a home for that somewhere in this document then that's outside of the protocols. All right, cool.
Yeah. Also, if you want to riff on that or have someone just kind of to brainstorm metrics with and write that kind of corollary doc, I'm happy to take some time and work.
We will be meeting today at 2 p.m. Eastern.
Perfect.
So come hang out with us then. Anybody else? Any other comments, questions, concerns, issues with this document, things that, you know, you want to see changed, things you want to see improved, you don't like a word? Going once, going twice, sold to the man who's running the meeting.
Yeah, if anyone has any additional feedback, as Jonathan mentioned, let's comment on the doc. We'll probably talk about this later this afternoon in the AutoFix SIG, but please try to provide some feedback, and worst case within the next 2 weeks. We want to try to get this thing wrapped up as Jonathan returns home.
I'll send him an email.
All right. Do we have any additional topics the group would like to collaborate on today? Art.
I don't know if this is a collaboration topic, but I just wanted to say thank you, everybody, for commenting on our vulnerability disclosure policy template. We really appreciated it. We, took, I think, pretty much all of your feedback in. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Ben, you're very welcome. I still owe you a couple comments from comments. It's not going to happen today.
No worries.
But we're glad to help. I'm glad you found it useful, and I hope your
of
community, gets value out of it.
Yeah, we definitely will, and thank you all for interacting with us. And we're happy if anyone else finds that sort of template useful.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, team. Appreciate that. Do we have any additional topics we wanted to talk about?
Art, do you want to talk at all about our conversation that we had about CVE drama, or is there any valuable takeaways that we can share with the group from that conversation?
There's no drama with CVE.
Never.
Yeah. And Jonathan, by no means to reduce the say anything less about the nasty issue that it is. It is a sort of pervasive issue in CVE.
No, yeah.
Not to say it's not a problem, but it is fairly common, and my position is it's understandably common. It is truly tricky to figure out what this is. Very, very quick summary. A specification, perhaps one angle on this could be that the XML authentication spec has perhaps a written in. Go ahead. Tell me.
The XML specification, as not authentication special, but the XML specification as written has external entity resolution built into the specification. So anybody that conforms to the specification in their parser is themselves vulnerable to a well-understood vulnerability called external entity processing. The Java standard library implements this specification correctly and is vulnerable. And my kind of tirade in the industry is, can we make it so that this known vulnerability is not something that's opted into by default across all parsers? Can we make it so that it's secure by default and people have to opt into the vulnerable behavior?
Sorry. Thank you, Jonathan, for saying what you did better than what I was going to say that you did.
All good.
No, we're on the money. Yeah. So this has happened before, right? Faithful implementation of a vulnerable spec or protocol. And, you can get into pretty interesting questions about vulnerability and should the spec even take care of this or not. But practically it comes down to, if this could be addressed at closer to the root of the graphs, it saves a lot of other people a lot of time. It may be a breaking change. There is some real consideration to sort of go through here. And then, so there's that fundamental issue. And then how does CVE deal with this is sort of another piece of the puzzle. And I'm going to say a number of hours have been spent by Jonathan and others arguing and discussing and trying to decide to assign or not. And pretty much my position has become, if more than one learned expert has spent more than an hour or two talking about it, the answer has already been, for another hour, assign the CVE already. We can discuss the thing and publish the thing. And instead of talking about that thing like she was talking about Java or whatever, or XXC, I forget what it is, we can just say CVE blah, the ID. We can go decide it's not a bug. We can go decide that the spec is going to be fixed or not. We can go decide that Java is or isn't going to do something. They're talking about hardening, which seems to me like they're going to respond, which means it should have a CVE ID. But that whole conversation is sticky. I may, if we wanted to, Jonathan, I may try to raise it up at CVE again. I believe Jonathan has exhausted the official CVE escalation path, and the higher court upheld the lower court's ruling to not assign in CVE terms.
For Java. Well, yeah, now it's inspiring me to go say, okay, fine. Maybe we should get a CVE for the specification and be like, okay, the CVE, the whole XML specification is vulnerable by default to this thing.
Yep. And there's precedent for this. There have been vulnerable specs in the past, and it is a reasonable thing to discuss. But again, and this gets a little bit sometimes argumentative within the CVE sort of board. What really is CVE about? I take a somewhat personal position that it is about identification of the abstract thing, which is a vulnerability, and nothing more. And it should not try to do more. And that's where we get argumentative. Yes. Anyway, I croak. But again, if you spend a couple hours with some knowledgeable people talking about it, the answers should already be set. Have a CVE, go figure it out. You can reject, you can dispute, you can modify CVEs later, but we have to talk about the thing. We should have an ID, and we should not spend, I did this recently with a very large multinational hardware software manufacturer. No one should be spending $50,000 in time discussing whether or not there should be a CVE ID.
You're feeling at that point, lawyers are involved in the conversation too, right?
No, not even yet. That would be like double the price. I mean, so there's this THX 1183 scene where the guy's climbing up the ladder and the computer decides to stop chasing him, I think. Everyone remember that. If you're arguing when you spent more than $1.50 on the CVE assignment, you spent too much money. All right, sorry.
Yeah.
So that's Jonathan, and that's the issue. We might take another crack at it from the spec side approach with CVE. And I'll tell you this, when I spend my hours and still think that I'm wasting my time,
yep,
it is good to push the edge cases, because that's how we advance the CVE rules and the CVE culture and all those things. You have to take one to the highest court in CVE land in order to kind of push anything around. Anyway, I'm done ranting, and Croak, please.
I would suggest, since this is not an isolated incident, this potentially could be an excellent panel and or birds of a feather session at the forthcoming much talked about VulnCon next year. Since we'll have all the industry luminaries together, it would be a great topic to kind of talk through how we could potentially do improve in the future.
Is there a CFP open for that yet, or is it just an idea currently?
Not yet.
Okay.
I'd be willing to say, and Croak, if you know better, please correct me, March 24-ish.
It sounds about right. I was sometime towards the end of first quarter, I think, is what I've heard.
It's roughly scheduled. This comes from the land of sort of PCERT SIG and CVE Summit, and the idea I've been proposing, even if I wasn't asked, was a day of PCERT SIG and a day of CVE and a day of other stuff. And then the fourth day is put the whole thing, can we assemble this all together? Because these islands of isolation are not solving our collective problems. And I'm saying that partly because CVE definitely wants to have a summit and they want to do all their CVE stuff. So let's CVE have a day, let PCERT SIG have a day of other stuff, which is also code for open source stuff. And then, but I'm not running the show, so that's just my suggestion. But I think there's real interest from multiple sectors here, and it's a great way to get together, right? All us open source hippies and all the commercially money-oriented people and the government-ishy people and the coordinators and the CISAs and the all of the folks, and see if we could string together a more functional vulnerability architecture process.
I could say just for this foundation and this particular working group, we've got a very strong response of interest to want to participate. And I think as we expand that out to like the CNCF or the GSD people, kind of the OpenSSF adjacent things, I think there's a lot of interest. People would love to participate. It sounds like Jonathan has a CFP in mind already.
Yep.
But I think this topic would be a great extended panel,
topic.
birds of a feather thing.
Great topic, I think.
I think we very easily could fill a day with CVD philosophical conversations of events we've had experienced, and kind of get the brain trust together to think through how it potentially could get solved with this. And there's many other challenges.
Yes.
And as soon as I hear anything official, I'll be glad to share it with this group and everyone that's expressed interest.
Perfect.
Do we have any other additional topics the group would like to discuss?
I guess I have a quick update. I had mentioned last week about the TC39 TG3 the security task group for TC39, and that the chair election was coming up. So the meeting was this week. Yesterday, the chair group was elected. So I think still working out the exact frequency, whether it's bi-weekly, monthly, but those meetings will be resuming imminently.
Awesome. Good. And people can reflect back on our meeting notes when we had that conversation the last time, if they want more information. All right, team, we will, with no other topics, we will adjourn so that I can try to fix my air travel to Spain.
You don't have, you can go fix your air travel. It's not, I got another one if you want it. Just a quick update on the Grid Artifact Repository audit. They're active I think I mentioned this a couple weeks ago. It's the idea that there's another working group with the SIG under the Open Source Security Fund. No, under the Securing Software Repositories working group. The goal of the SIG is to try to see if we can find organizations to fund pen tests of all the major artifact servers in the industry. That conversation is continuing to move forward. Alpha Omega's, there's interest from Alpha Omega's leadership to fund it potentially. So that'll be a discussion later today, or happening soon, hopefully. The other topic that I wanted to bring up, these are just like updates around the OpenSSF. Those are vulnerability disclosure related because they are vulnerabilities. No, I'll bring that other one is out of scope. All right. Anyways, that's the only other thing for me. So yeah.
Okay. Well, everyone enjoy the rest of your day. Happy open sourcing and CVD. Cheers all.
Bye.
Bye everyone. Yeah.